Hey, what's good? My name is SATURDAE, and this is part 8 of my EDM production series. And I want to get this starting to feel a little bit more polished. So before we get started, I want to do something really quick. So I'm going to set my playhead to bar 1, the beginning of the track. I'm going to hit Command B to bounce in place. I'm going to make sure there's no dithering. I'll explain what that is when we get to mastering. It's not super important. And then I know my end of the track here where it says transition. I zoomed in, so I know what it is, but it's set to 41. So I'm just going to change that to 41. You don't necessarily have to go to the beginning, by the way. It just makes this default already here, so you don't have to enter a bunch of numbers. I'm going to bounce this out real quick. We'll name this demo, and I'm just going to export this to my desktop. All right, so now I have this demo track exported. So I'm going to click and drag this in, and I'm going to bring this up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control M and mute this track. I'm going to change my icon. Don't judge me. I like dogs. I'm going to rename this to reference track just so we can hear the difference between the beginning stages when we were working on this track, and we can revisit this towards the end. For now, I'm going to press H, and I'm going to select this track and hit H again. And now it's disappeared from our view. And yeah, that 4 is just because there's 3 other tracks before it. Ignore these first 2 Ghost Docs tracks. I'm not going to explain that right now. We'll cover that like much later, probably after mastering. It's not super important. So I'm going to hide that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to come down to our effects mix here. Once again, I am going to duplicate a track. I'm going to bring this up here. I'm going to copy this track here. Do not copy the automation data. I'm also going to change this one to build 1 DownSweep just to keep it nice and organized so I don't get confused. And we'll change this to intro crash. So I'm going to bypass these plugins here, and I kind of want like a loud like drop thing. So I'm going to go into here, and what we can do is we can probably use this template to make this, but I want to get rid of this bode frequency shifter, and I'm probably I'll leave these on for now, but this LFO, this one, I need to change. Don't know what to say if I start. Yeah, this LFO I'm going to change to be a more aggressive slope here so that it crashes down a little bit faster. I'm going to greatly reduce this resonance here as well. All right, so now we have this little crash. Fade away. Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. And now I do want to layer this, so once again I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to come to Splice for this. I'm going to go to Browse, Instruments. I'm going to go down to Effects, and we will let's go for impacts here. And I'm going to look for like a clap impact. Something kind of like that maybe. Let's try this. I'm just going to drag this in. Oh, whoops. The reason that's not working is because it's a MIDI track for Serum. I need an audio track here, and it will kick your new track out of your submix, so that's why I brought it up there. I'm going to drag this in. I'm going to turn this way down because it's probably going to be really loud, and let's hear how this sounds. And you'll hear it's just the whole purpose of me adding this is just to add a kind of like a transient at the beginning. That little. So I'm going to use flex time on this, select monophonic, and I'm going to just pull this into 3. And I want to add a little bit of tremolo to this. Let's speed up the rate. Bring down the depth. Maybe something like that. This one sounds to me like it has some stereo imaging, probably from that reverb. So I'm going to load in span. It indeed does. And I want to just reduce that a tiny, tiny bit. I just like having things sound nice in mono, and just that cut. That should be fine. Okay, and I want to copy this first part, but because this is using flex time, I'm going to come into here, and in order to have this function open, you'll need to control click in any of the channels, go to track header components, and make sure track alternatives is selected. And I'm going to click this little arrow here and click duplicate. And now I have an A and a B. I like doing this whenever I'm working with audio. Once we get to vocal mixing, you'll see me doing this a lot. A is always my original track, just so it's always kept and preserved. And then B is if I'm doing anything to it. So I'm actually going to bypass these for now, just so I can kind of render this in place. And I'm going to bring this gain from -12 to 0, just so it renders at unity gain. I'm going to make sure selected and delete are chosen, selected track and delete. And this is just going to overwrite this track. And you'll notice now those like that weird coloring from flex time is gone. Now I'm going to reactivate these plugins so it didn't render with them. And we'll bring this back down to -12 where is that. And now I'm going to zoom in and we're going to copy this first little segment here. I'm going to copy this down and I am going to come to here. I'm going to go to delay and choose echo. And I'm going to pull the wet all the way up, dry all the way down. Color is just your filter. So if you're filtering, a lot of the time I'll leave this around default. And we'll try 1/4 for this. We'll pull the feedback to like 70%. I want to see if this sounds cool or not. Okay, I want to actually increase. We'll go to 1/8. And then let's increase the feedback to like 80. Ooh, that sounds kind of cool. So now we have this kind of like weird sound. I'm just kind of messing around to see if it'll sound cool. But I want to add on some tremolo here to get some movement. I'm going to leave the depth pretty high on this. Oh, tremolo needs to come below the echo. And maybe something like this sounds kind of cool. And this has to go below the echo for it to work because you're getting this echo out and all these reflections are shooting. So if you put it before, the delay is going to like void it out essentially. Now there is one more thing I would like to do to this, and I'm going to do this before the echo. And so if you go to audio units, you can go to Zypher Records if you have Serum, and you should be able to get a free download for Serum effects, which is an instance of Serum just for the effects tab. So I have that loaded up right here. How this works is you want to make sure that your noise oscillator is turned on and this preset is set to audio in. And then you also want to make sure that note latch is on so it'll work. And I think there's this thing on, so I'm going to bypass that. I'm not sure if this is just a bug or what's going on, but it's definitely working. But what I want to do with this is we're going to use LFO1 and apply this to the level. So it creates kind of like this cool sidechain. And this is another way if you don't want to set up sidechain compression with either a compressor or you don't want to have Kickstart too. You can use Serum effects that comes with Serum and do it this way. I use this almost exclusively for vocals, but I do like using this occasionally because you can switch on triplets and dotted. So I applied this to the level of the noise oscillator. I made this kind of shape and I switched from forward to ping pong so it kind of goes back and forth so it sounds kind of like this. I'm going to bypass echo real quick. So it kind of goes back and forth. And I also want to go into echo. This is going to sound weird. I'm going to put feedback at 100%. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. And I have it at 1/8 triplets. What I'm going to do for this sound, I think, is I'm going to go into our volume automation. I'm going to make a dot and I'm going to scroll it all the way down. And I'm just going to test this out. We'll bring this volume automation up. I think if we were to even drag it to here, it might sound cool. Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay if I start to... I'm gonna set another point here. Maybe drag this down a tiny bit. And let's rename this effects intro rash main. I'm gonna Command A, Command C, enter, Command V here, and parentheses echo. And I'm also going to change these icons real quick. And under these Serum effects too, I added on this reverb. But I think I want to add on an EQ to kind of tame some of this. Yeah, so I think I'm going to add an LFO shape here. We'll do something like this. And I know that this sound is going 4 bars because it's going to 5. So I'm going to set this to 4 bars here. And I can also add like a little resonance thing here too. Bring this down a bit. And now we have this kind of sound. And I'm going to leave this at plate. And now this is our intro part. And I've noticed that this is a little bit too loud here, but if I go to pull this volume down, you'll notice it keeps snapping up. That's because there's automation here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select trim and I'm just going to bring this down. Oh, I can't bring that down because this is already set at the bottom. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to deselect that and I'm going to bring this down a little bit more.
Don't know what to say if I start to fade away.
And was all that necessary? Maybe not, but I just think it's kind of like, it sounds cool to me. And I think doing a bunch of stuff like that throughout your song adds up. So now we have this little intro part. Okay, so I'm already hearing another effect I want, and I want that to start at 5 and end at 9. I'm actually going to extend this crash out to give it a little bit longer of a tail. And because we extended that, we also need to come into Serum 2 and change this to 4 bars instead of 2.
Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay?
All right, so something I'm going to do is I'm going to select this intro crash here. I'm going to do new track and leave so I don't erase this track. And now I'm going to come to this. I'm going to go into inspector and I'm going to reverse this. And I'm going to drag this here. And now we have this.
Start to fade away. Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay? If I start to fade.
Let me also come up to this. And I want to do a reverse here, but I'm going to have to duplicate this. I could also render it in place. Even with flex time off, I will have to move this to its own track in order to reverse this. I'm just going to render this in place. I think there was a bug happening. I think it's like stuck in flex time. So I'm just going to render this in place on a new track. I'm going to select and delete it. Okay, so I just duplicated this, put it on its own track, set it to unity gain. Going to delete the selected track. I think there was just like a flex time issue with it. That did render in the Pro Q, so I'm going to bypass that so I'm not applying it twice. Yeah, and now I can reverse this. So now we have this. Normally that's not that complicated. That was just weird.
Fade away. Will we be okay if I start to fade?
And I want to select these parts and I'm just going to, I could either pull that back, but I'm probably just going to fade them out, something like that. See how that sounds.
Okay if I start to fade away.
All right, and I'm going to rename these reverse for reverse. I'm going to copy this, paste this here, add reverse here, and I'm going to add a kickstart to both of these just to make them sound a little bit different from the original. The reason I'm moving this up is just so they're next to each other and I can quickly just apply this to the correct track. So we'll do that. That pump might alleviate this end part too, so it's not as sharp. And I kind of want there to be saturated reverb on this. As it gets higher in pitch, I want it to kind of swell out so that it doesn't like end so abruptly. So I'm going to eventually use a reverb on the channel as an insert, but for now I'm going to instead use this option here that's send. This is the exact same thing we've been using in Serum 2, which is just busing somewhere. So I'm going to send this to a bus. I'm just going to pick a random bus. We'll do bus 15. This is weird, but I'm going to immediately remove this. The whole point in me doing that was just to create this bus so that I have one that's going to be my main reverb. So I'm going to go to bus 15 here in my mixer, choose a reverb, and I'm going to use this Studio 2 setting, and I'm going to set this to like somewhere in this range. I'm going to adjust this decay rate back up to do around there. Pull this back a tiny bit, make it a little bit further away as well. We can keep this clean, maybe make it slightly bright. And stereo width there is fine, mix 100%. And I'm going to rename this main verb. And I'm going to come over here, control click on this and click create track. I'm going to press X to leave my mixer. I'm going to drag this all the way down. I'm going to do Shift Command D on this track, create a summing stack, and rename this to aux stack. And I'm going to change these icons. I just like using these. This is what I'm used to. But now I'm going to have, anytime I create a new aux stack, once we start mixing more, this is going to extend to like 8 things. I just like having these organized. Always make sure that this stack goes stereo out as well. It should not be getting routed into anything else. But I always just like having this here. It just keeps all my stacks organized. It's kind of unnecessary now because now I believe in Logic's new update, you can move these stacks around if I'm not mistaken. But in older versions, you weren't able to move your auxiliary channels around. So I used to make stacks so I could organize them by their bus number. So it was just more organized. That's why I do that. It's not super necessary, but it helps my workflow. So now that we have this reverb, I'm going to copy this reverb over to this effect, which I believe was right here. And I just did option click to do that. And now if we go to this reverb, we have it inserted here. So that's way too much, obviously, but we can do something like this. And then we can go to our reverb, go to mix, and then create a start point and an end point. And we can maybe bring that up to like, I don't know, 25% maybe, something like that. And then just give it an exponential slope. And we are going to do the exact same thing here. I want to copy this reverb to this channel. Perfect. And now we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to go to reverb, mix. We'll bring this down to like the same kind of level. Start it here, end it here, bring it up to about 27-ish, sure. And then exponential curve as well. And the reason I did this instead of simply adding on a default reverb is I know later on when I have vocals on there, I'm going to be using sends to go to that one auxiliary channel. And wherever possible, I like using the same reverb so it doesn't sound like there's a bunch of different rooms for everything. It just kind of adds to cohesion. So that's why I like to do that. And let's solo these real quick and see if this sounds okay. And these are both a little bit loud. Specifically this one, so I'm gonna pull this gain down. So now we have this sound.
Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay if I start to fade away?
And these are ending a little bit abruptly, so I'm going to extend these both out all the way. And then I'm gonna render these in place, but I'm gonna do it on new tracks and not delete the original. So Control V to do that. I'm gonna click and drag this track down like this. And so I just copied essentially this section. It doesn't have that reverb tail on it, but it'll be there. And I set up these echoes on each one with 100% wet. So, and they're set to 1/4. So right when this ends, these are 1/4 bar. So right when this ends, these will start echoing and they'll kind of fade out. I am gonna pull these down a tiny bit just so it's a little bit more subtle. But now we have this. And I just changed these to be dotted so they're kind of off time and it sounds a little bit weird. It's just so it's not like so on beat and more. I'm going to increase the feedback a tiny bit on these. Finally, we can add a little bit of movement to these. It might have been a bit faster to just put these in a bus because I'm doing the exact same processing, but we're already here, so whatever. I'm going to modulate this tremolo. And remember, the tremolo has to go after the echo, like this. Reduce the depth a little bit, pull back the smoothing. You can try like 1/8 dotted just to match the echo, and we'll copy that to the other one. Oh wait, it's 1/16 dotted. And now that should, there we go. And now that'll match what the delay is doing. These actually feel a little bit quiet too, so I am gonna add on a gain plugin towards the top. The reason I'm doing it at the top and not the bottom too is just so it catches more in the echo and the tremolo. All right, and now we can copy this here and name this echo and name this echo. And that was kind of a lot of work just to get this pretty basic effect, but again, I just like doing this for me. I feel like it adds up for the track as a whole. So I'm gonna kind of organize these real quick and bring this back up just so they're kind of all nice in an ascending order. We're getting kind of close to being done with doing some effects for a little bit. There's just 2 more I want to add. So I'm gonna come down here, copy this, drag this to 13, I believe. I'm gonna copy this twice here, and I'm gonna move this one to 13 and this one here. I'm gonna mute this bottom one real quick. And for this top one, what we're gonna do is we're gonna bypass that. I'm gonna open up Serum, and I'm gonna go to initiate preset, and I'm going to just make a preset real quick so I don't have to keep making these from scratch. So I'm gonna do that. We'll set the rate to 4 bars, and we're just gonna apply this to coarse pitch. We'll add a filter here, bring this down, apply this to our cutoff, apply this to resonance, and then change this to bright white and envelope. And I'm just gonna save this as a preset, just so whenever we wanna make a riser, we can just quickly come to this and I don't have to do all that setup again. I am gonna bypass this, and I'm gonna change this noise to this breath one. And let's go to the start of the sound. So we're at 13, I'm gonna solo this. And I'm gonna make sure that this noise is going to that filter. So I can click in this section here actually and just click filter, and it's going to filter 1 now. And I'm gonna quickly add on a kickstart to this because I know I want it to have a pump effect. I'm gonna turn the gain up on this. And I want to add on an EQ, just doing our standard filter sweep. And another way, by the way, that I could do what I'm doing here, I could also route this filter into filter. Let's just do that just to do it. So we're going to go into filter 2. We're going to turn on filter 2, and then we're going to change this to high 12. And we can pull this back. I'll bypass this EQ because we can do the same effect in here. I think doing it with the EQ might be a little bit faster, which is why I've been doing it, but they do the exact same thing. Let's pull this cutoff down a little bit and pull this resonance down. But yeah, we achieved that same effect just using the filters, and now we're getting routed into our main channel here. I'll get rid of this EQ because we don't need it anymore. Add some distortion just to get a little bit more gain out of this. Add some reverb. I'm gonna change this to vintage. And once again, we're going to use our standard less reverb on lows, more reverb on highs, filter out some of the lows on this. And I'm going to keep the sound pretty simple. That's probably all I want to do with this. I'm going to turn the gain up a little bit on this volume knob. And I am actually going to add an EQ here. I'm going to put this right after distortion because that distortion, once again, it brought up some of those low frequency notes again. I'm just going to double check where my filter starts at, so 175. So I don't want to go too high above that. So probably around there is okay. And we're doing okay phase wise. And I'll add on a tremolo. I'm going to do this one pretty gentle. And I'm going to pull this down. We'll do like 1/4 triplets maybe. Yeah, that sounds nice.
If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away.
And something I'm actually going to do, I'm also going to add on a compressor here now that I think about it. I'm going to apply this before the EQ, and I just kind of want to tame some of that tail end of it because it does get like a lot louder once those resonants start kicking in. So I'm getting about 5 dB of reduction towards the end. And I think I'm going to add on one more EQ, just a little bit more low frequencies than I want. We'll do something like that. And maybe also a delay, actually. That should be it for this sound though. Where's delay? Move this above our reverb. We're going to filter out some of those lows. You can keep this kind of higher, leave it there. I think that should be okay. This gives it a little bit more depth. I'm going to give it a touch more gain, something like that. And we're going to name this FX. We'll do like V1 breath out, I guess. All right, and now we have...
If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start...
And I'm just going to layer this with this intro crash thing we made earlier, this DownSweep. But I'm going to fine tune it so it matches this a little bit better. Because like we don't need this tremolo for it. I kind of want a cleaner, sharper sweep. So just some slight adjustments to this. Let's give it a little bit more resonance maybe. Then I'm gonna add one more EQ at the end here. I started making this kind of sharper, but I think that is a mistake because I was in solo and didn't realize how sharp that other noise is. I'm going to focus on having more low energy. Something like that might sound a bit nicer. I think I'm going to change this noise sound too, just so it's not both bright whites. That might help break it up a little bit. I just changed it to this J60 sound. It's just a little bit different from the bright white just to break it up. And I'm going to name this in that FX1, build one layer. We have something that sounds like this now.
Fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know what to say. If I start to fade away, will we be okay? If I start to fade away, don't know.
All right, so on playback, there's one issue I was hearing, which was here.
If I start to fade away.
It just sounded kind of strange to me. So I think I will I'll test extending these, but I might just get rid of them. But let's make this 1/4. We'll try 1/8 dotted, I guess. Yeah, that sounds better. Okay, I'm gonna change the colors of all of my effects real quick too. Let's do green. And I don't think I've mixed this one. I think I'm just going to add on some side EQ like that. All right, so now a bunch of the risers and effects are filling out a lot of this space. I want to start working on this drop though, and I want to kind of start mixing this lead bass a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is I want to duplicate this track, bring this up, and we have our verse basses here. This is our original respace. I'm gonna just delete that because we don't need it anymore because we have our own. And I'm going to Shift Command D here on these two tracks. And now we have a summing stack, or this is called a nesting stack. So we have a stack within a stack. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. And we have bass. So now we have our verse basses and our drop basses kind of organized together. Again, this is more for organization than anything else, but so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select both these and copy them up. Don't copy automation, we don't need that. And I'm going to change the name of this to drop bass sub. And we're going to mute this guy for right now. So I'm going to remove this stock EQ. I'm going to remove Space Designer. I'll move this Pro Q4 to the top. We probably won't need K-Clip 3 on this, but I am going to open up Serum 2. And what I want to do, so we have this sound here. Now, this sound, the only thing I want from it is the sub. So this is the only sound I want from this. I'm just going to check some of the routing and everything on this. I've muted some of these. I'm actually just going to completely remove these. I'm going to add on a equalizer. As you hear some of that clicking at the end, I don't need all that high frequency stuff. We really just want this sub. Now, if we open up Spam, we just have this nice kind of tone. I'm going to open up Pro Q4. I'm going to roll off some of this crap down here we don't need. Go to like 25. Like you can't even hear that. So, and then I'm going to apply another filter. So again, a low pass filter. And this will just tighten up the sub a little bit more, because we're getting rid of all this stuff. It has nice harmonics, but again, we have so much stuff that's going to be layered on top of this. I really just want to focus on the sub. I'm going to put this back to Unity. I'm going to bring this master gain up. And now on this lead bass, I'm going to remove this sub. And now we have something that sounds like this. This sound, I can remove all this stuff, but I want to add some glide to this as well, just to make it sound kind of cool. So I'm going to make some glides with this. Okay, so I copied over these notes from this lead bass to this sub track, and what I did was I wanted to add a little bit of variation with the sub. So I copied this note here and just made it going in between these two, so it's slightly overlapping up here, and it's just one octave up. So it's on D sharp 3, this is on D sharp 2. And then on the second rotation, I had, instead of these notes repeating, I just brought this down 2 semitones just to kind of break it up. Now the purpose of me doing this was in Serum. So I used a macro and set this to always under portamento and set it up about halfway to give it a good amount of glide. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull this all the way down, and I want this to glide, but I only want it to do it during this part. So I'm going to go into my automation. I'm going to go to Serum 2. I'm going to go to macros, and I'm going to go to glide, and I loop this section here just so it's easier for me to find, and we're going to activate it here and end it here, and we're just going to do that. And now if I open Serum, you'll see this mod move when it gets there, so that it only glides when I want it to, so it doesn't make the rest of the notes all messy. So it sounds kind of like this. Now I do want this note to start a little earlier, and I'm going to try and pull this into here. So I pulled this note into bar 26, so it was like around here. I pulled it in more just so it snaps earlier, because if we look at the sound of this sub, it's a little bit unusual, but we have these longer attack times, like 121 milliseconds for the sub. So it takes a little bit longer, so that's why I extended it. But now with our automation extended, it sounds like this. Just sounds really cool. It just gives like a nice kind of bass house tone. And then on this second half, I applied another instance of glide, and this is how I extended that note. So now it sounds like this on the second half solo. Just kind of breaks it up. It just sounds a little bit more dynamic and fun.
Fade
And I'm going to copy this over. I'm going to copy the automation. We can adjust this a little bit later, but I just want to get a concept going. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to copy this over. We're going to duplicate this up, copy this over here. And this one, we're going to focus on just our sub. And the reason I like copying these over is because it helps to have all your whatever preset settings are in it. So I'm going to bypass that and I'm going to change this to, let's look for a nice sub. And I kind of like this like distorted sounding sub for it. Sounds kind of cool. But you're going to notice there's like a click at the end, and that's coming from this kickstart. Now I did roll off some of the lows on it, so hopefully that alleviates a little bit. And then on here, we can go to this EQ.
Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay?
Okay, so now that we have kind of like a template for separation there, I want to get this lead kind of going. And there's not really anything else I want to do with this sub. It's already pretty heavily saturated and stuff, so there's not really much more distortion I could add to it. It has nice dynamic movement and everything. So I want to move over to this drop lead. And so let's just kind of like open this up and kind of deconstruct what's going on in here a little bit. Okay, so I have these 4 different basses going on now. So I have this sub that we made. And then we have this lead that we started with. Now, what I did with this was I left this sub on and then I just filtered out a good amount of it. And then I believe I kept most things as they were for the most part. I might have adjusted a few things in here, I'm not sure. So we have this sound. And we just rolled off to 100 to get it out of the way of that sub. And I wanted to get some more low mids in here, so I have this bass here. And again, all I did was copy this. I changed the waveforms, matched a couple of things in here, and then under effects, I bypassed this multiband to get rid of these highs. I'll turn this way down because it's gonna be loud. I just didn't want all those highs there. I added a reverb to it and used LFO1 to increase its reverb a little, just to give some space. I also added unison to both oscillators to make it a little bit more stereo. And then we have this top bass that has a little bit more reverb. Again, different waveforms, a good amount of unison on them. I left the compressor on here, and this is just giving kind of like that top end fuzz. And before mixing, this is what it sounds like now. So we're going to kind of work our way down. We already finished the sub. Let's EQ this and get this one sounding how we want it. So we are going to, this whole section in here, we want to reduce that. And we have that other, the second bass is going to fill up this area a good amount. So we just want to tighten this one up. And this is the tone I like from this one a lot. It's like kind of nasally. All right, let's add a compressor. For this, there's already so much saturation. Generally with like synth basses and stuff, I don't care to add saturation. I just go for transient control. So something like that. These settings are kind of fine. When I'm setting my release to, I try and like let this be a little musical, so you can see how it's like bouncing back in time, kind of. Just gonna match this output gain. Check span. I'm gonna add another EQ at the top here and just roll off that side information down here. So we got some compression out of this. I'm once again going to add another filter here, and I might do a steeper slope here because we really don't want anything pretty much below there. All right, and it looks like according to Span that did a pretty good job at that. And the reason I avoided turning this down is because this has a relationship with all these effects in here. So if I bypass that, it sounds unnatural, and it's just gonna be a lot of work to kind of backtrack and fix all that. So rather I turn it down after the fact and just filter it out. All right, and now let's clip this and make it nice and crazy loud. Okay, so about 4, before clipping and after. Same output gain, so it's just way louder. And maybe I'm going a little insane with these filters, but I just really don't want any sub frequencies clashing down here, especially on like bigger systems. maybe get a little bit more aggressive with this roll off just to avoid that. All right, sweet. So now we have the first two. Let's move on to the third. So this one we want to, this is the area we kind of want to keep. I do want to control it a little bit, but I'm just going to do that with dynamic EQ rather than cutting at all. This top area is not as necessary as the other one because we don't have that noise filter. I'll give a slight boost here. Again, trying to avoid this section where I know that the other synth is boosting. We'll probably just cut here, just to make room for that first synth. And I'm gonna, once again, add on another compressor. We'll keep the same settings just to keep them all like the same. All right, let's double check span real quick. Might do a little bit of side EQ at the top. I want to reduce the entire range of everything, so this is actually an instance where Ozone Imager would work pretty good for this. So I'm just going to pull this width in a little bit. Something like that should be okay. All right, and now let's clip this. I'm going to soften this one up a little bit because this one's going to be a lot easier to distort. A little too much crackling there for me. Something like that should be okay. Not doing anything crazy, but all right, let's do the last one. And you'll notice how each of these has their own space too. Like each of these sounds, I'm carving out their own kind of area for them to live in. Just do something simple for an EQ, something like that maybe. Let's compress this guy. And I always like to compress before I clip. It just makes your transients a bit more controlled. So see how this spike is way up here, and then there's some that the spikes are like much lower. You'll start hitting the bass and getting very aggressive distortion if you don't compress before clipping a lot of the time. So you can get a better resulted clip by compressing first. So that's why I do that. We might need another Ozone Imager. I'm gonna add another instance of that at the top here. I'll go a little bit less aggressive than the first one. We'll go something like here. That should be okay. And I'm kind of okay with this like nasty sounding clip. It sounds, I can solo this clip, hang on. So it's adding that. It's kind of quiet. I don't know if you can hear it that well, but I'm okay adding that. It just adds kind of a cool saturation. And this is already going to be super quiet in the mix anyway. So I'm going to name this mid, and I'm going to name this high. And now we have 4 basses that are kind of making up this drop instead of just that original one. Now that we have that, what I want to do is I'm going to delete these. I'm going to copy this down twice, and then we will copy these over here. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to add that reverb and that filter sweep on the build because now I deleted those and now it sounds like this, which we don't want. That's coming in way too hot. So I'm going to go to this drop bus mix. I am going to copy over this reverb. This is the main reverb that we made earlier. I'm going to activate this. All right, and then I'm going to also add on an EQ. We'll put the EQ on before the reverb. I'm going to bypass the reverb. And I know that this went to like 1150-ish, so I'm just going to pull this out there. And we'll make this automation on this bass mix. So I'm going to select Pro Q4, frequency, band 1, and then have it cut off completely there. And we'll do something like that. And now I'm going to turn on Pro Q4, and I'm going to go to mix, and we'll set that here, and we'll set this all the way at the end here. We're going to bring that all the way down as well. Now, one final thing I'm going to do before hitting play here is I'm going to go into this EQ, and I'm going to change the setting from 0 latency to linear phase. The difference between linear phase and 0 latency, linear phase is just, it's sort of a more accurate version of EQing because the major advantage it has is it does not create any phase shift. However, it does create something called pre-ringing. It's a very minimal like effect that you can sometimes sort of kind of hear. I would say like in general though, like using linear phase over 0 latency would be ideal because of that. You can use any type of filter slope or anything. However, these use a lot more CPU. So usually I just reserve linear phase for submix filtering if I'm going to use it. And this just prevents any like weird phase shift spikes because you can get those sometimes if you're applying what I'm doing, like doing automation on a filter. Sometimes you'll randomly get like a spike in volume on your chain and it'll start clipping. It's because you're creating a bunch of phase shift there. So that's why I like to use linear phase here. Generally on most other instances though, you're fine just using 0 latency. Again, these will run your computer down really quick. So now we have this.
Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay if I start to fade away? Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay if I start to fade away? Don't know what to say if I start to fade away. Will we be okay if I start to fade away?
All right, and that's sounding pretty sick. So this, just to compare to, this was our, let me gain match these real quick. So these are kind of comparable in volume, but this was our original bass. And it still sounds pretty sick. This is what we made using splitting and layering. It just has like a lot more dynamics and range to it. I can still fine tune this as well. Some of the gain on this is not like perfectly gain stage and matched up to where it should be. But as a whole, I just think it sounds a lot cleaner and everything's isolated, so I can easily go in and adjust certain things. So there's just a lot more information going on. It sounds like a much fuller sound because of that. Final note too, I did this off recording, but I pulled all these MIDI notes in because some of them were just like going into the next note and it sounded like one long note instead of two. So I just did a slight pullback on all these MIDI notes, just selected a region, did Command A and pulled them back. And I made sure to match their length. If you go to the edge of these notes and hold, it'll say the length. So this one's 1 2 2 1. So I just made sure when I did that on each instance, they were matching, so they're all hitting the exact same time. So this is okay for now. Something I do probably want to revisit is when I look in span on this, you'll notice this 2 to 300 range is very low. Like there's a fat gap here. And even with me, I went into the EQ and I pulled back this cut here and I gave a little bit more gain to this one that focuses on the mids, but it's still not retaining enough signal. So I'm probably either going to come back in a bit and layer this a little with one more, or try and get some more mid frequencies out of this, because it does sound like it's missing a little bit of that, the low mid like body to it. So that's something I'll address later, but for now, let's move on and let's get this second part going. So I just want to EQ this guy, get rid of some of this crap down here, and we'll filter this off. Low pass filter here. And that clicking's annoying, but you're not going to be able to hear that in the actual track. Like it's already gone. So again, why soloing is usually not the move. Okay, so we have this sound. And again, I'm going to load up span. I can kind of hear what's happening, but so something I'm noticing with this is there's hardly any orange in here. And this sound, it sounds cool, but there's no width to it. So I want to try and give it some. So let's have this soloed. Like that already sounds so much better. It is going to make it completely out of phase, so I'm going to have to adjust this. But that's pretty easy to do. So I can just pull this blend down. Like before and after. It just sounds like so much better. I'm going to pull this blend down a little bit more. But don't be afraid to put stereo imaging on basses. Just be mindful of what it's doing relative to your mix. So this only took me like a minute or two to do, but this was our original sound. And this is our new sound. And the way I did this, you're going to notice too, there are still some phase issues. We're going to fix that and make it a little bit more mono, but what I did was I added a filter, routed everything into it, and I made this re-triggering LFO shape, and this is a sidechain shape, so it's copying what Kickstart is doing, so it starts at 0 and then exponentially moves up and then sustains the rest of the time. And then I went into the mix, I added in this multi-band compressor, got a good amount of compression, and then just gave it some gain back, added on this ASYM distortion, gave it a good bit of drive and pulled it back. A lot of the width is coming from this hyperdimension. I left it at 4 voices and then applied this LFO so that it pumps when the filter opens up with that sidechain. Rolled off all the low frequencies that were added with the distortion and compressor with this EQ filter, and then gave it reverb, again fluctuating it, so when that filter opens up it gives more reverb, but it pulls it way down when it's off. And now we have another EQ here. We got rid of all this low end because we don't want that in the way of our sub. And I think at the very top here, I'm gonna add ozone imager. We're gonna make this a little bit more thin, maybe something like that. I do want to test this in mono. All right, we'll revisit that in a second. I next want to compress this and then clip it. So we're gonna do Pro C2 digital compression. Kind of leave that at default. That should be okay. Again, just trying to get a more consistent volume so that we can clip it more aggressively and accurately and get it louder. And we can solo the wet. So that's all the distortion it's adding, which for this sound is kind of okay. I think I'm gonna add another EQ under this and use this for some side EQ just on this low end part, something like that. And let's check in mono with our bass. Okay, so this is definitely a little bit too wide for me. Let's maybe pull this blend in a little bit more, and if I can go to this ozone, let me try doing this. It was just a little bit too wide. Now, something I want to do real quick to test all this, I'm going to go to this master channel, ignore everything I have set up in here because we'll adjust all this shit later. But I'm going to activate my gain plugin on the master channel and just make sure that this is turned on to mono so we can hear the track in mono. Okay, so I just cleaned up a couple of random things. So there's one more thing I want to do, which is to copy over this sidechain. So I'm going to add this on all instances of these drop basses here. I'm going to set this at the end of my signal chain as well. And this will just make that kick pop out a little bit more as well. And for this second part, we don't need to do that because the way that the sidechain is sloped, we have that kick start activating. So those first notes are always, the downbeat is always getting basically erased. So it's never conflicting with the kick. So now this is what our drop sounds like. So we got a good amount done in this session. In the next one, I really want to start addressing some of the drums here. And I'm not going to bother with the second half of the track until this first half is sounding really on point. And then we can just simply copy and paste this over here and then go through and come up with ideas. But we have a lot of the core concepts down and things are starting to fall into place, especially once we get these drums in. It's going to sound really smooth. So that's going to wrap up this one. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.